So I'm Alyssa Randall. I trained as a biomedical engineer and I worked for a few years in research and development. I then went back to school and I did an MBA where I fell in love with machine learning at the time. Weird thing to fall in love with while doing an MBA, but and I've spent sort of the last 5 years in the entrepreneur space in Toronto. Um, I am currently at a company called AltisLabs. We are a um, how best to describe. AltisLabs is trying to improve clinical research by creating novel biomarkers on imaging modalities. So we're machine learning, computer vision space. And my hobbies, well, I mean, since COVID started, it's pretty much just long walks outside and I have a dog that I love. Yeah, it's pretty boring these days, not getting to do too much. I also sit on a couple nonprofits that I work closely with, such as the Institution of Engineering and Technology, which takes up a bit of time. But other than that, I'm fairly boring in general.
Okay.
And yeah,
Yeah. So,
sorry.
talking about, you said you did MBA and then you went ahead and pursued entrepreneurship, and you're right now working with AltisLab. So, what has been your journey? Since the time you got a degree and to this to till date, what has been your journey?
It's sort of just falling forward, I guess would be the best way to put it. So while I was doing my MBA, I met a very intelligent mathematician and a computer scientist who were creating incredibly novel methods of doing computer vision on edge devices. Back in 2015, was people weren't even thinking about sort of computational footprint of machine learning, and so it was, I just sort of fell into it. I had these two very smart men who had built something that was truly novel that didn't have the ability to communicate that to business people or an understanding of how computational footprint might affect costs or the scalability or adoptability of a technology. And so I very quickly fell in love with looking at technology through that lens, understanding the technology and the innovation not on the level that I could build it or recreate it, but on the level that I could say, this is the competitive advantage of using this type of algorithm over this type of algorithm. And that's been really fun. So I was with that company for about a year and a half. We sadly ended up filing for bankruptcy. And there's a whole life lesson in there, I think, around the leaders of the company being the right people to lead a company versus work in an R&D lab. And so the company filed for bankruptcy. It has rebooted. It does still exist as a small engineering firm, but I left at that time. So I then took I decided I wanted to see what a more traditional MBA would look like career, and I went to Capital One. And so I worked in internal strategy for Capital One for about a year and a half, and then I decided that there's an opportunity to start my own startup in the quantum computing space, and I was very excited to do that. So I took that opportunity and created a startup that was focused on optimizing scheduling resources. And in the quantum space, quantum computing, D-Wave actually just announced, I think, 5,000 qubits or something, which is just astronomical. And hyperconnectivity, I think it's 15 connections. It's really important if you're interested in quantum computing. It actually means that quantum computing is theoretically getting to the scale that's actually relevant to companies, which is very exciting. But that didn't exist back in 2018 when we were working on that project. And so what you were looking for was companies, technology, and industries that had a problem that you could solve using today's technology that would be solved exponentially better if quantum computers were available. And so we had zeroed in on scheduling of supercomputers. Banks, pharmaceutical companies, large industry, for privacy reasons, tend to own or at least manage their own supercomputer infrastructure and cloud computing infrastructure. And so they rely heavily on these schedulers that haven't really been updated or optimized in the last 30 years. They're using sort of the same core logic. And so we were able to very quickly realize why research supercomputers are at 99% capacity utilization, but industry computers are at like 10 or 20% capacity, which when you consider it costs a couple $1,000,000 for that computer to sit there every year alone, and you're buying more computer resources is a big problem. So was working on that for about a year. My co-founder ultimately decided he wasn't interested in entrepreneurship, and as a non-technical person, at that point, sort of left my hands tied, and so the company died. And then I took a couple months to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, where I wanted to go, and a friend approached me about a company called Lilia. I met the CEO. I really enjoyed working, really enjoyed the idea, and then was with them until they got accepted into Y Combinator, and then ultimately decided to part ways to join AltisLabs.
Awesome. I mean, it has been an incredible journey, I must say, with full of, challenges. Yeah. So what are some of the obstacles, the major obstacles or the difficult times you faced throughout this journey?
I think the big ones are always, I'm too optimistic about people. I think that's definitely burned me numerous times. I'm happy to, if I love an idea, if I love a project, I'm happy to give people multiple benefits of the doubt and just sort of try, which is, I think, in a large organization, productive, because you have all these safety barriers to make sure that, ultimately the company's still running smoothly. In startups, there's no HR department. I'm currently our operations, HR, finance, project management, like you just wear so many different hats that, in a small team, you don't have that person removed from the situation to sort of come in and help sort it out. And that's something that I think is a huge obstacle in the entrepreneur space. If you don't get the warm and fuzzies from someone, if someone is telling you that they're a certain way, you got to just take them at their word and not think that you can make that situation or that relationship better. It's just not going to happen. The other big one, I think, is financial planning. Startups can be extremely stressful, but one of the biggest ways that they're stressful is the fact that you're usually taking a pay cut in very, very early startups. You're absolutely taking a pay cut as a founder. And so I was very lucky in that when I graduated, my partner and I sort of made the agreement that we wouldn't get used to spending my salary. So if I ever made any money, we would just get used to not having that salary there, so that, one, it boosts your savings when you're making money, but two, it gives the financial freedom of not needing to maintain. And so that's what I tell a lot of entrepreneurs when they're coming out of school that know that they want to be an entrepreneur but are potentially going to a bank or something. Set a minimum salary that you can live off of.
Mm-hmm.
And then don't spend anything more than that. Because if you get used to taking $5,000 vacations every year, it's going to be really, really hard to stop. If you get used to spending, going to the best restaurants in the city every week, that's going to be a really hard habit to quit. And all of a sudden you're going to find that you don't have that money. So, instead just live poor to begin with, and never get used to having money if you're really serious about wanting to go do a startup.
That's really very serious advice, and I totally agree with you. Like you need to pay yourself some minimum salary so that you can at least survive and keep a kind of tight control on your own budgets. And yeah, so what are some of your key achievements that you have kind of earned throughout this journey, while we talked about the obstacles?
Yeah, I've been really proud of funding that has been raised. There's been a couple of situations, sadly, where funding's been raised and due to internal reasons, it wasn't ethical to accept the funding. So effectively, funding was coming in, everyone had shaked hands, but the internal dynamic had changed in such a way that the partnership wasn't going to continue. So that's depressing, but at the same time, I think I am really proud that we've raised, my first company, we raised and over, a couple $1 million, some in grant funding, some in investor funding. For the Canadians out there, there's so many grants. If you're in a tech startup, it's really silly to not consider them. You really can turn $1 into $2 in Canada, which is great. And most countries have similar programs. I'm just Canadian, so obviously I'm biased as to our grants that have been so helpful. And then, I'm really proud of getting customers. I work in the deep B2B space, automotive, banking, healthcare. These people take 6 months to a year to get on board, and so getting them on board in 3 months or even 6 months can be just a huge accomplishment that you get really proud of. And then the other thing is attracting talent. I'm always proud when someone that I think will be successful says that they want to work on my team. I just think that that's the biggest accomplishment as an entrepreneur that you can sort of have.
So you are the go-to person for them.
Yeah, I mean, if someone's like, I want to work for you, and they're really passionate about what you're doing, what the company is doing, what you're doing, I think that to me is always always an accomplishment.
That's incredible, actually, and I give kudos to that. So what is one piece of advice would you like to give to our female engineers or to our budding entrepreneurs who actually want to just start their company or just to follow their dreams? What is one piece of advice from your side?
I think if I were to give advice to you on anything, the one thing that I say is always do what you would regret the most not doing. And I've sort of followed that through since my early 20s. I'm in my early 30s now, and it's served me really, really well in the past decade. There's been times where I've decided to move across the country for a job, and realized that meant ending a relationship. But for me, the job was just so attractive that I sort of was like, okay, if I stay, will I regret taking the job? And if I leave, will I regret the relationship? And the yes was both, but at the end of the day, the job was more important. And I think my view, especially when I was younger, was that. Sorry, it's COVID, so I'm obviously working from our bedroom. My husband has an office in our living room, and it's living. Sorry. So I think that what's been really, really important is just doing what I regret not doing most. And so that decision fed taking jobs, is fed going to my MBA sooner. It's how I decided on entrepreneurship instead of traditional MBA route. And it's how I decided to leave companies to join other companies. And it's how I decided to turn down job offers. I've also felt that way where it was a really solid offer, and I could get really behind what that opportunity was. But at the end of the day, there was another offer that was just sort of sat in my gut as something that I was a little bit more excited about. And so that's what I would say to do. And then the other piece of advice that I just have on my, I don't know. I think that's the main one. Yeah.
Okay. No worries. You can recollect the date, otherwise you can let them include it. So what is one thing you want to change more than why?
Oh gosh.
Well, this can be related to a technology they want to build or something related to people that they want to change, and why.
I think I personally decided to focus a lot on bringing deep technology to industry, because it's a process that I feel suited for. I also think smoothly. That being said, if I can change anything in the world, it would definitely be social mobility. I really feel that the ability for people to move in social classes and to actually earn their way up is really beneficial for innovation, success of the society as a whole, and you can then go down a rabbit hole how you do that. But I think the enabling opportunities, even if it's not equal, because the world certainly is equal, but enabling those opportunities and not limiting people from being able to sort of make their own mark is really valuable.
That's true. And that's a good piece of advice actually. And when I saw your profile, you had some experience, some steps working with the tech start. So what is that success that you would like to share with us?
Tech starts was great. I genuinely loved the Tech Starts program. We did it in 2016 with the first started that was computer vision. I was able to do computing on edge devices, similar to the technology that your Tesla will have. And so that was wonderful. One of the things that I really loved about Tech Starts that I think actually makes it quite unique is that they have these special streams that are sponsored by large industry people in that stream. So we went down for automotive, Motor City, I believe is what it was called. We were the first week we were meeting with R&D at Ford, GM, Chrysler, and that just moves the needle so quickly for our company. And then to add in all the other, they provide the same resources we get at incubators, creating a financial model, thinking about pricing, marketing, all those things which are really great. But what I really loved about Techstars and why I would pick Stars again is because they focus so closely on industry relationships and making sure that they're connecting industry to startups in a way that is healthy for the startup. Because sometimes that's not the case. And that just really moves the needle for our company.
Great, awesome. And I also learned from your profile that since you are in Canada, so if somebody wants to start a business in Canada, what kind of funding option would you get for person?
Yeah, so it's I would say initially planning on starting it's a little bit difficult. There's lots of grants for matching funding. So if you're able to get if you can get $50,000, you can turn that into $100,000 quite easily. But that being said, getting that first $2,000 is really hard. And I don't know if Canada necessarily helps with that particularly well. I will say though that if you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to decide where you want to live, Canada actually has a great immigration program for entrepreneurs. You can speed up your PR and residency application process. Because you're an entrepreneur, which is also very attractive. I live downtown Toronto. Waterloo Metro is a huge machine learning hub. Vancouver is quite a quantum hub. So if either of those two territories, it's really nice. And then the list of grants go on and on. But there's small agencies at provincial and local level that focus on smaller grants. I would say probably anywhere from 10 to I think the largest probably $50,000, and then you have other grant agencies on a provincial, national level that range anywhere from $50 to $20 million. And so the biggest thing is to realize that grant agencies like VCs are people that are making financial decisions. So you're forming a relationship with those people. And that will help forming good relationships with people will help them make the decisions you want them to. And then it's a lot of it's match funding or tax credits where they'll pay you back for R&D work, etc. that you've done. But yeah, I think it's definitely something to take, but it's not going to give you your seed money. You sort of have to get their initial funding, and then you can multiply it quite easily.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Alyssa. I think that's all.